Yes, sir.
I'm Dwight Haynes, and today is the birthday of General Dwight Eisenhower.
He was a good man. Who would have known that?
1950, I was privileged to be at the Boy Scout Jamboree at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania, and later he had some pretty strong words.
He's fine. He can have.
Thank you. He had some pretty strong, this president, Dwight Eisenhower, later had some pretty strong words to say about the growing military-industrial complex. So I'm wondering, it seems that some of the Republican candidates just want to keep growing the defense budget. That's first and foremost. We'll do whatever it takes, even if other things have to be sacrificed, because that's most important, I hear. I'm wondering, would you be willing to set some limits? And will you make sure that corporations that sell weapon systems don't influence our politicians?
Absolutely. So that's a very good point. And I thought I brought up this point to a certain extent, in that every aspect of spending needs to be challenged in Washington, D.C. Every aspect. When you have the F-35, this incredible, apparently, this will be the most powerful plane, in the sky. Better than the Russians, better than the Chinese, but its cost, the costs are exponentially more than whatever anybody ever imagined, and it's taken exponentially more time than what anybody imagined. And one of the things that's going on in Washington, D.C. now, Senator McCain's committee and the House as well, is looking at procurement reform, which I think is essential. Instead of having these big, huge, complex weapon systems, whatever they are, that require maybe 2 or 3 contractors, the only people that can get it are these big aggregators, if you will. What we ought to do is have a more strategic approach to this and then build on it. And there's lots of reasons for this. One is cost, one is speed, to getting the equipment out into the field as fast as possible. It makes it, you're much more agile if you start small and build on it. And as important, think how fast technology is evolving. So we're building these big sophisticated weapon systems. The F-35 is the biggest, most expensive one, I think. And they take way too long. It does not allow for competition. And the costs seem to be there's always cost overruns. And then the technology has to be refreshed anyway. Better to do this in increments and allow the technology to grow as we innovate and new technologies emerge. There's all sorts of, just across the spectrum of life. You see technological advances certainly in information technology, but also GPS technology, all the things that require a weapon system to be effective. There's just dramatic changes. The weight of certain metals, the storage of energy, of batteries, there's all sorts of things that if we did it the right way, and this is what's being proposed, and I totally support this. It also get many more contractors onto the playing field and create a more competitive environment, more competitive process, so that the big guys don't dominate. Thank you all very much. I'd love to shake hands with as many people as I can.
Would you all remain standing, please, for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. Mr. President, thank you so much for that great introduction, and your endorsement is very meaningful. Thank you all for coming out and welcoming. I'm from Florida, and it's great to be in a place that honors the space program. It's really good to be here. And if you think about it, America always has been an aspirational country, hasn't it? We've always done things that kind of defied the imagination of the rest of the world. And being able to launch, put a man on the moon, which was the aspirational goal in the early 1960s when the Russians the Soviets, excuse me. I get them confused these days because Putin's acting like a Soviet. But when the Soviets launched their rocket into space, it lit a fire under America, and we sent a man to the moon. It was an incredible engineering feat. It defied the imagination of everyone. We do that regularly in this country, and we need to keep doing it, whether it's to explore the stars or explore the brain. Think about it. You know, I meet people all the time that have loved ones that have dementia or Alzheimer's, and we haven't seen the kind of forward movement in the discovery of medicines to be able to take care of Alzheimer's. Or in the state of Florida, we have a voucher program for kids that have learning disabilities. There's been a surge of children that have autism. And in our case, we can send those parents, if they're not satisfied with their public school, can send their kids with the state money and local money to go to a private school. There's all sorts of challenges, the mental health challenges we see playing out in our communities all across this country. And imagine if we were aspirational again. I think we've lost a little of that spirit. We would have aspirational goals to discover the diseases that are neurological. We're on the verge of the greatest time to be alive, is what I believe. And we just have to start acting like we've done in the past to fix a few big complex things in order for us to rise up again. This is not the worst time. This is not the worst time in American history. This is not the time to be fed, have people come and feed your angst or feed your anger. There's a legitimate reason why people are angry. Look at Washington, D.C. You know, I made a mistake. I was asked on a sports talk show. I was asked my views on the Washington Redskins. And I said, look, you know, there are a lot of big pressing problems here. I don't think we need to be so politically correct to try to, through government, take the name Redskins off of, if that's what they want, leave them alone, for crying out loud. Let's worry about the complicated nature of our regulations and taxes and other things. And the left went crazy, as you might expect, because they are a little more politically correct these days. And someone sent me an email and said, Jeb, the term Redskins isn't the pejorative, it's Washington that's the pejorative. If they're going to change their name. I don't know what you'd call it, Northern Virginia Redskins or something like that. Washington is broken. It's ridiculous that we have 3-day work weeks right now. They're not working this week. Now, how many people here work where you just decide you're going to take a week off, or you're not going to show up at a committee hearing, or you're not going to go vote? You would have a deduction in your pay for the missed hours that you have. Washington ought to have that as well. Elected officials ought to serve us with a servant's heart, which means that they ought to be there doing their work rather than doing whatever else they do. Elected officials shouldn't finish their job and then go out the back door and start lobbying the people that they were serving with. There ought to be a 6-year ban on lobbyists, just as there is in many places. There's 29 states that have passed resolutions advocating a balanced budget amendment. I hope we get to the point where we have a balanced budget amendment. It's not going to happen in Washington, but the states and people can demand this. Government needs to live within our means rather than their means. And if we focused on bringing people together to forge consensus on how we get to a balanced budget with that constitutional requirement, I guarantee you, if I was president, we could do it. We need a line item veto power for the next president of the United States. They called me Vito Corleone when I was governor of the state of Florida. That was supposed to be a pejorative. That was supposed to be like being called the Washington Redskins, I guess. The Speaker of the House, Mr. President, called me that, and then it became, I embraced it. 2,500 separate line items in the budget, not to be punitive, not to say, well, you weren't on my team, I was going to send you a signal, not to play the games of politics, but simply based on the principle that people don't, if spending doesn't go through the proper process, it shouldn't exist. Eliminating the pork, what we call turkeys in Florida, was a way that we proved that government's income needed to grow slower than personal income. I turned the whole state and the whole system, Tallahassee, upside down when I was governor. And the result was that over 8 years, we cut taxes every year, totaling $19 billion. We reduced the state government workforce by 11%, 13,000 fewer government workers. We challenged the system of employment, where there's no more lifetime contracts of employment in state government. You can fire someone for incompetence or for cause in Florida. Again, this wasn't based on being punitive. This was simply based on Government should be the servant, not the master. And in Washington, D.C., for some reason, they've lost sight of this. They've completely lost sight of it. Think about the Veterans Administration, Jim. Think about what's going on there. You have a system of bonusing the executives inside the VA. Fine, that's a kind of a business practice. And they were going to be bonused for reducing the wait lists, which are horrific. They're too long. That sounds fine. But what they forgot to do was to provide care for the veterans. They reduced the waiting list by taking them off the list, and some vets died. You know how many people got fired because of that egregious act? 3. You know how many people work at the Veterans Administration? 330,000. The sheer incompetence because of the scale and scope of government now is imperiling our ability to fix problems. People are angry for good reason. The question is, are we just going to stay angry? Or are we going to fix it? And I know how to do this because I did exactly the things that people want to see Washington do in Tallahassee. And the net result was that we were one of 2 states to go to AAA bond rating. That doesn't sound like a big deal, except that the United States government has had a downgrade from AAA to AA. It is not the reflection of the greatness of our country when you see structural deficits. Under President Obama's watch, there will be more deficit accumulated, more debt accumulated than all of the 43 presidents prior to him. We have to restore America's greatness, which we're on the verge of doing. We have to bring back, we need to bring Vito Corleone from Florida to Washington, D.C., and we need to bring back the very basic fundamental fact that government is the servant, not the master. We're the host, they're the parasite. If we get sick, the parasite dies too. You can't create economic activity through government. If you listened last night to the debate, you might have thought that, yeah, all power resides in Washington. All forms of regulation create prosperity. All forms of more taxes make it better for people. More spending through Washington makes things better. Well, here's the deal. Workforce participation rates today are lower than they were in 1977. Because of Obamacare principally, 6.5 million people more are working part-time. 6.5 million people are working part-time, the majority of which want to work full-time. We have unemployment they talk about at 6%. The fact is it's double-digit. Income today is lower for the first time in a recovery, and it's $2,000 lower disposable income for families. And 6 million more people are living in poverty. Who's fooling who? The progressive liberal agenda has failed us. Now we have to offer a compelling alternative of reforming our taxes, simplifying the code, shifting power back to people and businesses rather than having all the carve-outs and the special interests, promoting the bigger businesses that have the lobbyists and all the special interests in Washington that make it easier for them to survive but make it harder for the next generation of job creators to exist. For the first time in American history, more businesses are being closed than being formed. And it's because we have abdicated all power to Washington, D.C. The job of the next President of the United States is to lift people's spirits by fixing how we tax, fixing the regulatory system, making government work as a servant again, fixing our entitlement problems that will overwhelm the next generation of people and the generation after that. This is not sustainable, but if we fix it and grow at 4% rather than 2%, people will have a chance to be able to pursue their dreams again. And guess what? The interaction of people, all of us together in a dynamic country, free of government mandates and rules and taxes the way we have it today, will create more things that really will move our heart and will drive us forward. We'll find cures for diseases. We'll lead the world in so many different ways. I trust 330 million people in a crazy fashion, interacting amongst ourselves in a dynamic way through trial and error than any government program ever created, and I hope you do as well. Now, if we grow at 4%, which I believe we do, embracing the energy revolution, fixing our entitlement problems, being frugal as it relates to government spending and challenging how government works, we can get there. But we're never going to grow at 4% unless we also recognize that we're living in a perilous world. And each day, another story comes out to prove that it's perilous. And it's perilous because we have abdicated our responsibilities as a world leader. This president does not believe that American leadership is a force for good in the world. And with all due respect to him, he's dead wrong. This country leads. When we lead, we create a greater chance for peace and security. If I'm elected president, here's the deal. We're going to rebuild our military. We're going to treat our troops with respect. We're going to arm them. The objective here is not to do the straw man thing that Barack Obama says, where if you're not for his nuanced, sophisticated view that you're a warmonger. That's not true. Leadership means that we don't have to sin. We're not the world's policemen, but we have to lead. People have to know that we have their back. Imagine being the Prime Minister of Israel right now, under attack by organized efforts by Palestinians to try to destabilize Jerusalem, and where Hamas now is feeling its oats again in the Gaza Strip. Without an ally, without the I have your back kind of relationship that we should always have for Israel, we now are casting them aside in their minds. They will take action, defend as any country will. Of course they will. But we should have their back. There should be no gap between the United States and Israel. And frankly, all of our friends need to know that we have their back. And our enemies need to fear us. In the last few days, I've heard people saying, well, won't we intimidate, won't we create a problem if we push back on Putin's actions in Syria, where there are now allegedly Iranian troops there with the agreement, the same country that we signed an agreement with. They're now actively promoting and supporting the brutality of the Assad regime. In fact, this afternoon I read an article about a Cuban general now is playing a part. They're recreating this axis of opponents to the United States to the point where we have serious problems. And we're worried about offending Putin? Here's the deal. He's a bully. He should be worried about offending us, not the other way around. We need to stand strong and tall. And strong and tall means that we'll create more security. Today in Syria, millions are leaving their country. 200,000 have been killed. There are refugees, if they're forced back there, whether they're Yazidis or Christians or Muslims, that'll either be raped, held as slaves, or killed. And the United States needs to lead. If we stand for anything, it are the values of human life. And today, people wonder where the United States is. And the void is being filled in a way that will create problems for the next generation of time. We have to be engaged in the world. Our friends need to know that we have their back. And our enemies need to adjust to the reality that American leadership is going to be there for a long, long while. We need to restore our military, restore our counterintelligence capabilities and intelligence capabilities, provide support for our military troops, and do it in a loud and clear way. If you want to get to peace through strength, you have to restore America's leadership in the world, and that gets us back on track to creating high sustained economic growth where people are lifted up. The final thing I want to say to you is, look, this is not about the loud personalities, the big personalities on the stage. It really isn't. It's not about anybody running for president, all 75 of us. It really isn't. It's about people like the single moms that I meet all over this country that have a child stuck in a failing school. And they want to be able to go to a high-performing charter school, or they want a voucher to be able to go to a private school to afford the same things that people of affluence have. It should be a right for every mom and dad to pick the school that best meets the needs of their child. It should be. It's about the small businessman, husband and wife team that I met in Denver that have a company of 4 people that told me candidly they were about ready to go out of business because of the complexity of Obamacare and the confusion that this brings for their own business. It's about the military family wondering whether the leave of whether their loved one is going to come back home, or their stay would have to be extended because we've gutted the military forces. We're shrinking it at a time when we need to rebuild it. It's about a lot of people that are 1 or 2 paychecks away from utter disaster. It's about Bertha Aponte, a friend of mine who I met in 1998 as a candidate. At the time, we weren't friends. And she let me have it in a town meeting. Hopefully today this won't happen tonight. She let me have it. She really did. She said, you don't care about families with kids with developmental disabilities. You don't understand anything about my life. You don't care about me. And I couldn't convince her, so I said, tell you what, in the next month, I'll give you 4 days. And you can schedule my life and teach me. I want to listen first. I want to hear what it's like. And what she told me was the greatest fear that she and Milton have is whether they're going to outlive Lucy. And I learned a lot in those 4 days. I went to group homes and saw what it's like to have the dignity of an independent life. I went to the workplaces where people with developmental disabilities were getting jobs, and guess what? The customers loved it, and the employees found joy because everybody's an asset in this country, on this planet. Everybody has some value. Everybody has a chance to contribute. The left believes that people are liabilities that are needed, that they need to manage from up above. We believe in the human spirit. We believe that everybody has a God-given ability to make a contribution, and all of our policies should be organized around that. That's what I learned from Luce. And now, she was an independent, and her husband was a Democrat. They're one of my strongest supporters because we changed the whole system. And 30,000 families in Florida now receive benefits for their loved one. And 30,000 more families today don't worry whether they're going to outlive their child. Listening and learning is important. I worry about the people I've met on my life journey that just want to be lifted up. They want a chance to be able to live a life of purpose and meaning. People like Denisha Merriweather, a young girl who took advantage of the corporate tax scholarship in Florida, the largest voucher program in the country. Now about 75 to 80,000 kids go to private schools indirectly with public money. And when she was in third grade, she's now 25 years old. When she was in third grade, she was held back, and she was held back again. Her older brother had a run-in with the law. Her mom was lost, and she was angry. No one had ever told this young, precious girl that she was smart, that she was capable of learning. She was effectively, like it happens amongst hundreds of thousands of kids in this country, she was just being cast aside. Well, because we challenged the orthodoxy of our times, and we created the first statewide voucher program in the country, and the second and the third, and one of those was this program, her godmother found out about it, and she got to go to a Christian school, which is constitutional, just for the record. It's still viable, still working. And Denisha, when she was told that she was capable of learning, when she was told she was an asset rather than a liability, when she was told that she had a purpose in her life and that she was loved, she accelerated her learning to take back the third grade that she's held back, and she did it again. And she was the first in her family to graduate from high school. And she was the first in her immediate family to graduate from college. There are 250,000 children in Florida that are grade level readers because I challenged everything about how our education system worked. I took on the teachers union. You see the tire marks here, right here, that one? The scars on my head, because I fought and we won. And we opened up the system, and kids like Denisha Merriweather, and I don't know if she's a Republican or Democrat or independent, it doesn't matter. She now has a chance to rise up. Imagine a country that focused on the simple fact that all of us are assets, that life is a gift from God, that we should be focused on how do we build capacity so that people can earn success. In whatever policy it is, the whole focus ought to be on lifting people up. If we get this right, if you run a campaign the right way and you have a principle-centered leader that knows how to fix this thing, this will be the most extraordinary time to be alive in this world. I believe it in my heart. I hope you all do as well. And I humbly ask for your support and your vote in the most important primary that exists in the United States. Thank you all very much. Mike? Yes, sir. I haven't seen a Michelle Bachmann t-shirt in a while.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor Bush. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming here. The question I want to ask you actually is about the other state, Iowa, that's in this mix. There's actually right now, and I'm worried because it affects the Constitution, the 5th, 6th, and the 14th Amendments. There's 3 laws in Iowa, Hodges, Weaver and Jones that denies a person the right to defend themselves in a misdemeanor criminal trial. They're not allowed to see evidence against them. They're not allowed to defend themselves in any way.
That sounds like that violates the Bill of Rights.
So I want to ask you where you stand on our rights under the Constitution of something such as that, and states and judges violating those kind of rights under the Constitution.
Without knowing the specifics, the Bill of Rights trumps state law, plain and simple. So whether it's the Second Amendment, and you have states that overreach in trying to restrict gun rights for law-abiding citizens or other, normally that's settled out in the federal court. So I don't know the specifics of it, but look, the Bill of Rights I was the chairman of the National Constitution Center for a couple of years, and I had a chance to fall in love with the Constitution again. Normally you learn about it when you're a kid, and it's different, it's kind of interesting, but you don't realize the power of the Constitution. It plays out in our lives each and every day, and it is a cherished document. It is an incredible blueprint for a free society. In fact, we may be the only country that actually has a set of rights that protects us from our government. And it's powerful. As long as we're a self-governing people, this document will keep us free and will maintain the greatness of this country, because people will rise to the challenge of innovating and just pursuing their lives in a free society. I can't tell you the specifics of the Iowa laws. In fact, it's never come up when I go out to Iowa, but I'm going to now have to learn about it. Thank you for the question. Yes, ma'am. Mike's coming your way.
Hi, welcome again to New Hampshire. I have two questions. To increase
Why don't you make it a one question, two parts?
Okay, two parts. Here we go. To increase our military, how are we going to fund that? Would be number one. And for the refugees from Syria who are fleeing their country, how do you feel about bringing them into the United States?
Well, first, the first responsibility of our national government is our national defense. If you had to ask, put it this way, if you had to pick the one thing, if there's only one thing that they do, what would it be? It wouldn't be, I don't think it'd be carrying the mail. Don't think it'd be Amtrak. I think it would be protecting our shores. And so the way I look at this is, whether you have it or not, you ought to look at this from the perspective of zero-based budgeting, in effect. That's the way you should look at it as a leader. And so I would fund the first priority first, and then challenge the orthodoxies of other things, and do this in a strategic way. The Defense Department needs to be challenged just as much as the Veterans Administration does. The VA has a hospital they started for $300 million. They had a cost overrun that went to $800. Now it's $1.7 or $1.8 billion. It's not finished in Aurora, Colorado. You can't make that up. I don't think the president of the New Hampshire Senate would allow a governor to run away with that kind of spending. There'd be oversight. In Washington, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, I guess. So we can reform the Defense Department. The military programs that they're implementing are extraordinarily costly. They take too long. There's a lot of challenging to save money. But the simple fact is we're gutting the force levels that will put us in a very precarious position. So first things first, and challenge how we do things. Secondly, we got to grow the economy at a faster rate. If you grow the economy at 4% rather than 2%, you lessen the demands on government, which means you lessen spending growth, for sure, and you also bring in revenue far more than the most exotic forms of taxation that the left is proposing. Last night, I don't know if anybody was keeping a meter on the promises of taxes raised and spending spent, but it would like ding, ding, ding. It's like getting up. Bernie Sanders has proposed $18 trillion of spending in over a 10-year period, and it's September or October of the year before the election, and he's just warming up. And so growing the economy will create more revenue than people imagine. And I think if you get the denominator growing, the numerator doesn't look as bad. You deal with the structural problems on that side. And then as it relates to Syria, here's the deal. The first priority for our country is to create a strategy to take out ISIS and Assad. That should be the first strategy to deal with refugees. And I proposed one. I actually went to the Reagan Library now almost close to 2 months ago, and I proposed it. What I proposed was a no-fly zone And frankly, if Assad was going to continue to barrel bomb the innocent people in his country, the United States, in relatively short order, could destroy his air force and destroy the ability to land planes. That would solve that problem like that. Now it's been made more complicated with Russia's involvement. But we need to lead the world. There should be one army, the remnants of the Syrian Free Army that we promised to help and then avoided doing it, and then we had the red line and then we didn't do it. All of this, we need to get back into the game and create a unified effort with safe zones to deal with this challenge. And we have that capability of doing it. If you saw what happened, I think it was early this week or late last week, ISIS is now, looks like ISIS has killed, more than scores of people in Ankara, Turkey. This is now spilling out into the region. The region needs to be engaged in this. Turkey, Jordan, where they have millions of people in refugee camps in these countries. We need to get the Persian Gulf countries involved. They should be financing the great majority of this. We need to unleash our Air Force by having air forward controllers and people knowing exactly where to launch these sorties. We need to take the lawyers and tell them to take a step back. This is protecting our national security. The best way to deal with the refugee problem is to deal with the source of why we have refugees. And as it relates to the number of people, numbers coming, we need to make sure they're screened, but we should participate in that as well. Look, I don't think we should abandon the core values, the goodness of our country. I don't think we're that small. I think we have to recognize that we have internal problems in our own country for sure. I get that. But whatever the number is that's being proposed to come in with proper screening, if the option is murder, rape, beheadings, because that's the option for many of these people, we should play a role in that as well. But our primary role historically has been to lead the world to eradicate the problems that cause this. The Europeans can play a significant role in this as well, because imagine Germany's now accepting 800,000 refugees. This is going to be a huge, huge problem, to use a term that other candidates seem to use a lot. It is going to be a big problem for sure. And those problems are going to play out unless they get engaged to help create a more stable Syria as well. Yes, sir.
I don't know why I have a need to say this, but your brother made a lot of difficult decisions, and I think, by and large, I didn't agree with all of them, but I think he was a pretty great president. And anyway.
So, you can say that all you want.
And as it relates to Iraq,
he's also a mighty fine brother.
He seems like a great guy. And we know that if the Obama administration had followed through with your brother's decisions related to Iraq, probably we wouldn't be in this mess today. But one question, two parts.
Yep.
If you got away with it, I can. Where do you differ from your brother? And the other question is related to education. Most Republicans prefer to have educational decision-making devolved to the states, and you are a strong supporter of Common Core, which seems to centralize a lot of those decisions into Washington.
Great. First, where I differ from my brother, I'm taller and younger, probably not as smart. So the context for presidents are always different. So when my dad was president in 1989, the world has changed. And the year 2000 was different than 1989, and I know there was a fascination of the difference between them as well. The difference in my brother's administration was we got attacked, and he became a wartime president. And I think he did an extraordinary job keeping us safe. And as a result, the other areas where a president can put pressure on Congress not to spend and to kind of create some discipline probably subsided, because he was focused, as he should have been, as commander-in-chief of the greatest fighting force that's ever been assembled. And so I'm not faulting him. I'm just saying that you can just check my record as governor. Cut taxes every year at $19 billion. John Stossel's done a report which I like because it made me look the best of all the governors running for president, where we cut spending more than any of the governors that are running. And it's adjusted for the times in which we were serving. It was adjusted for all sort of population growth. On a per capita basis, we cut spending. When I left, there was $9 billion of reserves. That was, Mr. President, put it in perspective, that was 35% of general revenue. No, I mean, no one was close. Who knows? We might have had 8 hurricanes and 4 tropical storms hit us, or a financial meltdown. I mean, these things matter. I was a committed conservative all the way through, and that's what I would be as president. And as a governor, I wanted all the authority on education, all of it. I would have taken a lump sum from Washington, D.C. Give me the Title I money, that's for the kids, the schools with low-performing schools. Give me the IDEA money, that's the monies that go for children with learning disabilities. Give me all the early childhood literacy, all the early Head Start. Give me all that money. There's like 30 programs for the pre-K. Lump them together, give me whatever my percentage is. Give me an outcome that you want me to achieve, and leave me alone. That's what I would have wanted. 80% of the bureaucrats in the Department of Education in Tallahassee were there to fill out the forms for the 10% of the money we got from Washington, D.C. And so I do not believe Common Core are higher standards. And if the states want to have them, great. If they want to have different standards, fine. Just make them high. Look, the idea they're common is fine, but it's not. We had the greatest gains in learning of any state in the country. Check it out. I'm not prone to exaggeration. Compared to others, at least, I'm not prone to exaggeration. So the greatest gains of learning happened because we raised standards, we had real accountability, we graded schools A through F, 100% based on student learning. Every mom and dad knew an F was not as good as an A. When schools showed improvement, they got $100 per student more. When it was an F, parents were given vouchers to go to a private school or a high-performing public school. We eliminated social promotion in 3rd grade, this insidious idea that when you're in 4th grade, and you don't know how to read, that somehow there's going to be like some divine intervention to be able to get you through the day. You can't do science and math if you can't read. All of that was state-driven. And that's the way it should be. There should be no federal involvement in the creation of standards, content, or curriculum. And if the federal government doesn't reauthorize the K-12 law, which they're about ready to do, the Republicans, this may be the one thing the Republicans do, which will put a lid on the federal government's involvement, direct or indirect, then I'll do it by executive order, because this is important. Now, can we get to the bigger conversation, which is 1/3 of our kids are college or career ready? Who thinks that's good? Think of the shattered lives that end with that result. That's where we are. We've dumbed it all down so much to make everybody, be above average, in effect, that now we're threatened with lowering standards to get into college, lowering the content for reading and math. So you're basically redoing high school math and reading at college level. And then we're putting student loans on top of the backs of students who can't graduate with a 4-year degree in 4 years. That's the path we're on, $1.2 trillion of debt. To reverse that, we need to have high, lofty expectations and zero tolerance for the attitude that some kids can learn and some kids can't. Because in Florida, we proved that otherwise. Just to put it in perspective, we were 50th out of 50 in the graduation rate. Good. 50 is bad.
Sorry.
One would be good.
My math is bad.
And so we couldn't even whisper, thank God for, name your favorite state. And we had improvement. We've had 15 years or almost 20 years of straight improvement because of this, because of our accountability system. There's a better way to do this, but it needs to be state-led and state-driven. Someone over here. Yes, sir, back in the back. It's a little dark back there, but...
Thanks. So following the same vein of education, as a college student, I was listening to the debate last night for the Democrats, and Bernie Sanders said that he wants free college education. Hillary Clinton says she wants lower interest rates. Lower interest rates. How would you deal with the issue of education in college?
So first, let me give you the good news. If you have any children in Florida, in-state Florida students have the lowest tuition of any country, any state in the United States. And it's because we have two things. We have a Bright Future Scholarship program that's merit-based, and any person that has a GPA of X and an SAT of Y gets full ride. Gets a full ride to go to school. Now, you still have to pay for the out-of-pocket costs. That, plus we put a cap on tuition. And we have thanks now, we started it, but it's been enhanced dramatically under Governor Scott. We now have a system where schools are measured on outcomes. Universities actually have to produce what we expect them to. Here's the deal. We measure degree completion in this country for public universities with full-time equivalent students. We measure a 4-year degree completion in 6 years. Well, why don't we call it a 6-year degree? I mean, this is ridiculous. Full-time equivalent students, by the way, credits now mean 12 credit hours. Now, I don't have a lot of sympathy for this because I graduated in 2 years, and I worked. And I wanted to do it because I was really motivated. I was madly in love with my wife of 42 years now. I want to get out of this stuff and get going with my life. So I was motivated. Not a lot of kids get that lucky, like I did. But you can graduate and work. Think about it. 18 hours. That'd be a big load for college. You couldn't get it now you couldn't get those credits in many schools because professors don't teach the same way they might have back in the past. But 18 hours, and assume just for a moment that you actually studied an hour for every hour that you took. I don't remember that in my case, but maybe I did. So you're up to 36 hours. I don't ever remember in my adult life working less than 36 hours any week since 21 years old. I mean, this is ludicrous to tell a 21-year-old kid or an 18 or 19-year-old kid that they can't do more than what they're being told they can do now. We should get 4-year degrees done in 4 years. You want to save money for student loans? Get the throughput faster so that students can graduate at a faster rate. Then make sure that there's real accountability. In Florida, we now have this system that I was trying to describe where we have a pool of money, and each year it grows, and it's the accountability money. And if you have degree completion rates that don't meet the objective, you get money taken away, and the schools that do better get money given to them. And so now we have a system where everybody's competing to do the things we want more of, which is not psych majors, but majors in degrees that actually can give someone a job, and doing it in 4 years rather than 6. And then the system around that with the government support and the tuition support creates something that's probably the best deal that people will get in Florida, whether it's community colleges or higher ed, than any other interaction they'll have with government. There's lots of those kind of ideas that exist in this country, and the federal government should get out of the way a little bit and be a partner for innovation from the bottom up, across the spectrum of policy. The government in Washington is just not designed to come up with a creative idea, and their impulse is to take power away. And as you take power away, you take the innovative spirit away as well. And imposing over 50 states, despite the good intentions, never works as well as trying a New Hampshire way and a Florida way and a different way. So just know instinctively, whatever the subject matter that comes up tonight, and in most other ways, I default first to shifting power back to the states, rather than have the government be the end-all and be-all, and focus then on the priorities. Keeping us safe, building a military, a counterintelligence and intelligence capability, the infrastructure that is nationwide, the things that really matter for us, for our safety and for our growth. And that's what I think the federal government should work on. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question in behalf of my mother-in-law here.
Okay.
She's very worried about our natural resources.
Okay.
And whether or not they're going to run out, and with all the immigrant population coming in,
yeah.
And if we bring in refugees, and so is that pretty much what it is?
I've been concerned about that for a long time.
So I share your concern about protecting the natural resources. In fact, I think we have a duty. We're the dominant species on the planet. Our nature is a gift from God. We're children of God. I'm going to simplify this. This is how I get to where I believe we need to be. We have a duty. We have a duty of conservation and protection. The good news for America is we're a big, big, big country full of abundance. And we can grow our economy. We can be respectful of the natural environment and find common ground. And I'll resort back to my experience again in Florida. In Florida, we had the largest land purchasing programs in the country. It was called Florida Forever. And it was a bipartisan consensus in our state that every year we would buy $300 million of pristine Florida before it got developed. Before, a developer would come and buy it and be able to put housing on or whatever. This was in the ecosystems that we needed to protect. Florida's a lot different than New Hampshire. I've been traveling around this beautiful state. Our trees don't change colors in Florida. I've never seen more beautiful mountains and hills than you have here. We're like, man, Florida's got some good things going on, but it also has an extraordinarily fragile environment. And we had a duty, and it's a value of our state, to protect wild Florida. And we did it. And the way we could do it was to grow our economy, because that provided the resources for us to make this commitment. If you think about the Everglades, if you've ever been down in South Florida, there is no other place like it. I'm proud of it. It's a resource that is unique to the world. And it's got all sorts of fauna and critters and fish that need to be protected. It's also our water supply. It's another place where there is not a conflict, but you need to share the resource and do it in a respectful way. And under my watch, we began the process of cleaning up the Everglades and protecting the water resource for nature as well as for the growing population. And I think that's the way you do this. You do it respectful of nature, but you also recognize that we've got to allow people. I worry as much about all the other things that go on. The thing I worry about the most is how much money people have in their pockets. I'm not worried about my rear end. I'm worried about people's wallets. They're not full. People are really struggling right now. They're 1 or 2 paychecks away of having big changes in their lives. And we should be sensitive to that, because government is putting a lid on people's aspirations in that regard. So every time I think about the needs of the country, or in my case when I was governor, I was also mindful of the fact that we should be growing income at the same time.
What about up here?
Okay, yes. Go ahead, just let it rip.
Okay, sure. So I actually came down from the Seacoast. I was a student down there, and I came with some faith leaders, and I wanted to offer my question to them because they've been patiently waiting.
Oh, you're yielding your time?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Well done.
Thank you, Governor. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your years of public service. And
tell me about first of all, what's your ministry?
I'm Larry Brickner-Wood from Durham, New Hampshire. I'm a chaplain at the United Campus Ministry at the University of New Hampshire.
Great.
And to my left is Cheryl Grady, the associate chaplain at St. Thomas More Roman Catholic Student Center in Durham. Yeah.
I'm on your team.
Yeah. We're all children of God,
yes,
right?
We are. Yes, we are. Absolutely. That was a stupid joke.
I make them all the time. We would just like to offer a simple prayer. Like you, we're people of faith, and that's the issue that really concerns us. We'd like to offer that in as humbly and as respectfully as we can. We pray for our leaders to ease the suffering in communities affected by climate change and transition us swiftly to a more just society, God of all creation.
We pray for the poor and vulnerable, those most affected by climate change and fossil fuel extraction. God of all creation, hear our prayers.
We pray for those harmed by fracking, mountaintop removal, coal mining, natural gas pipelines, and offshore oil drilling. God of all creation, hear our prayer.
And finally, we pray for our leaders to open their hearts to climate justice. God of all creation.
And Governor, I'd love to just, as a leader, as a visionary leader, someone who did some great things in Florida, I'd like to know how you will help us lead us into facing the climate change and those most affected by.
So I appreciate you being here. Thanks for the yield. That was a very elegant way to get to the task at hand. Look, the answer I gave really applies to this issue as well. I think we can solve more problems when our economy is growing, when people's income is growing. And so the solution can't be to hollow out economic activity. Because you could reduce carbon emissions and we could all increasingly move towards poverty. And I don't think that's the answer for our country. In fact, that's kind of the path we're on. Disposable income in this country is now $2,000 lower than it was 6 years ago. In a recovery, that's never happened before. And we have these big structural changes going on around the world, and some people can just write this off, that this is just, you have to get used to it. This is kind of the end of the American era, just have to accept it. I don't believe that's the case. So here's how I would answer your question. And I answered it as a resident of Miami, a place that my home is probably 12 feet above sea level, so I'm on a high point in our community. 12 is about as high as it gets. If you have, over some extended period of time, if you have rising sea levels, and then you have rising tides, at high tide, in a place like Florida, it was not engineered and designed for any kind of major increase in tide. So the first thing that I think we have to do is to adapt, to create policies of adaptation, to recognize that if the climate is to change, we should have an insurance policy, if you will, to adapt to these things. Secondly, the proper role for government in this is, in my mind, is to spend more money on basic research to identify the next disruptive energy sources that will be competitive with all the others that we use now. And you can see how that plays out. If you follow energy policy in our country, natural gas, because of fracking and hydraulic drilling, has had a dramatic increase in reserves, and the price has gone down fivefold. It's gone from double digits down to $2 to $2.50 a thousand cubic feet. And it's created an abundant source of energy that actually has reduced carbon emissions by 10% in the last decade as we convert from coal and other heavier sources of carbon energy. And it's also challenged the other sources of energy. So solar has seen a dramatic reduction in its cost because the baseline now has dropped thanks to natural gas. Wind is competitive today. In a place like Iowa, where you have ample wind, consistent wind, you now have wind being built without any subsidies. And it's because we're, in our country at least, investing in these long-term things and then creating an environment where competition forces down cost and change creates the desired effect. And that's the intersection where we need to be, in my mind. Solving problems and then fixing and growing our economy at the same time. So,
keeping fossil fuels in the ground. I mean, that's
no, that would not be my suggestion, because that would create,
That's what we just prayed about.
No, it wouldn't. It would be a bad deal. It would be a horrible deal. It would increase utility prices by exponentially. The people that would be hurt by that are low-income people and moderate-income people, the people that this faith community and everybody else that I know of cares about. Yep.
You mentioned entitlements. We all know that Social Security is not going to go on forever if we don't make any changes to it.
Right.
It's probably going to run out of money in anywhere from 7 to 17 years, depending upon who you listen to. What kind of things would you be doing specifically to make sure that doesn't happen and ensure Social Security for our seniors, kids, and grandkids?
So first, I answered this question my very first trip to New Hampshire by responding to someone that asked the exact question, exactly how you did it, and someone in the back yelled at me, "It's not an entitlement." And it's actually not an entitlement. It's a supplemental retirement system. So before anybody yells at me, I wanted to be clear. Entitlements would be Obamacare, Medicaid, Medicare. Those are entitlements based on certain criteria, income or age. But Social Security is an actuarially unsound supplemental retirement system. It was not that way when it was created, when life expectancy was 64 when it was founded and retirement age was 65. It was like this most conservatively. I grew up in Texas, and people used to, I can remember not my parents, but adults would talk about Franklin Roosevelt like he was a socialist or something. That's the most conservative idea that, imagine if someone proposed that in Washington, D.C. right now, they would be considered, Paul Ryan or someone like that, not on the left. So how do you fix it? Well, the same way we fixed it in the 1980s. You got to get people together from both parties, but the simple way of doing this is to raise the cap for higher income people and to moderately, over an extended period of time, raise the retirement age. That's the path that most people agree is the way to solve this. So every year, and protect it and preserve it for those that already have it. So this would be going forward, for every month, you'd take it up a month for every year, and over time you would phase it in. That would bring about solvency for Social Security, just as it did in the 1980s. The same process applies. The bigger challenge, I think, is Medicare and Medicaid, which are growing at a rate that is just, it's 3 times the rate of all the other spending. And the power of compounding ultimately is going to consume everything else. And today, or yesterday, I proposed a way to deal with Medicaid, which was to get it out of the hands of Washington, allow states to take the Medicaid dollars plus CPI going forward, take the kids' insurance money, the so-called S-chip monies, put it in a lump sum, and take the Obamacare subsidies that are done through the exchanges, put them together, and allow the legislatures and governors of the states, without the mandates that exist right now, to craft 21st century insurance policies that are focused on catastrophic coverage, low premium coverage, expand the amount of HSAs. Assume for a moment, this will be a radical idea, that poor people actually make informed choices when you give them information, that they're not going to do, this idea that somehow people in poverty can't make decisions for themselves perpetuates poverty. It's wrong. I've seen too many examples where the opposite is the case. Poor people are poor. They're capable of making decisions. And so I think that's the bigger challenge. And in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to unveil a plan as it relates to Medicare. Yes. We got a mic coming.
Thank you. In reform to that,
you're next.
You have people with Medicaid and you have Obamacare, and you have people like me who work full-time, can't afford insurance for the work. I don't qualify for Obamacare, and I'm bipolar. And I'm fighting every day to get Medicaid, to try and get medicines, because it's not cheap. It's expensive when you have things like this, and you want to be a productive person.
Exactly.
In order for me to get insurance, I have to qualify for disability. I can work. I'm just as capable as the next person. I can help run your campaign. I mean, I can do anything. I can fly to the moon.
Hey, I'm looking for someone.
But the point is, I'm actually here. I'm working. I'm doing my job. I don't want to just accept government money because I have a small thing. But people like me fall through the cracks, and that's not fair. How do you want to help us?
2 ideas.
Who actually do this?
2 ideas. One, in the healthcare plan I unveiled yesterday, which repeals Obamacare and replaces it with a new system, we would give credits to every person that does not have company insurance. And that credit would be equal to what they could purchase in whatever means that they could have. So we basically took the credit amount, and then if you allowed the states to go forward with new plans, states could add to that. Or a small business, because this either-or problem that you face as an individual, and I'll get to that as it relates to disability, it also applies to small businesses. So businesses either provide the full boat insurance with all the mandates and all the costs, or they don't provide anything. So in my plan, I would say small businesses could also make contributions to people's individual insurance, their employees, so it's not either or, and they would get a tax deduction for that. And the final thing is SSI disability. You're completely right that it needs to be reformed. It's bankrupt. There's a Social Security trust fund that is already bankrupt. It's grown dramatically. And one of the challenges is you either are disabled, which means you can't work, or you don't get anything. And there are ways for people that have partial disabilities, which sounds like, I'm certainly not diagnosing you here, but you know, a partial disability, that there ought to be a partial payment. And that just makes common sense, but that's not how, that would require a change in law, and I advocate that because that would lessen the costs of SSI disability and it'd get people back in the workforce. There's some other ideas about how people are trapped not working. Have you all heard about the marriage penalty? Yes. You got it. You've had that. My wife would say that I'm the marriage penalty, but so if if you have two spouses, you have a spouse that's working part-time or not working at all and needs to get back in the workforce or wants to get back in the workforce, every dollar they earn, their first dollars, are taxed at the marginal rate of their spouse, of the person that is working full-time. So they could be paying 30% on, could be close to a minimum wage to work part-time. And that cost impedes many people from getting back in the workforce. I think we ought to allow for people to file individually to eliminate the marriage penalty. Another way to deal with Social Security is to recognize that people, even if you're allowed to be retired, a lot of people, it's a supplemental retirement system. It means that you're not going to necessarily be able to live off that alone. So if you're 67 years old and you want to work or you have to work, you continue to pay in through the employee's portion of the payroll tax. You've already paid for 50 years, right? From 20 on to 70, to 67. I've proposed as a way to generate more work and more income for people to allow for people 67 or older not have to continue to pay into the payroll because that's their retirement. It goes right to their pockets, allowing them to grow. We have an earned income tax credit in our country that is the best means to deal with people that are near or at the poverty level to get them to work. Every time people talk about raising the minimum wage, I think $15 was the high bid rate last night in the debate. It will kill 500,000 jobs. Trust me. This is, on the left and right, that's pretty much the argument. And it's true, because automation, innovation takes place and people have to lower their costs, and that's how they do it. Earned income tax credit for people that are single, which doesn't exist now, and say from 20 to 25, if you got that, you'd have hundreds of thousands of young people being able to work and get their first rung on the ladder. Every one of these things requires a change because the well-intended ideas and laws might have worked in 1950, maybe in 1975. They don't work in the world we're in today. So we need a total transformation of the relationship government has as it relates to regulation and taxes. Good luck. Yeah, I'm sorry, we'll do two, because you've been holding your hand up the whole time. I felt it.
Hi, Governor. I want to ask you this since we're standing right here in the middle of space. My name's Liz, and I'm from the Space Coast in Florida. In June 2005, we were both watching an amazing experience of Space Shuttle Discovery returning to flight. Since then, I decided to join the fellow citizens of basically the United States as Citizens for Space. What are you going to do to get Congress on board increasing the budget from under 1% to bring the space program back to the United States, making us the leading nation or leading country in the world, and not just Russia and China?
Yeah, I mean, look, you may remember during my last years as governor, there was a expendable launch vehicle plan that was being built. And the state of Florida actually put up a sizable amount of dough for this. I think we put up $50 million to lure one of the, I can't remember if it was Grumman or Lockheed, or I think it was Lockheed, to build, or Grumman, it was Grumman in Melbourne to build and design this so that it would replace the shuttle. And it would be kind of an interim to the next generation of launch vehicle that ultimately would look like you could launch it and it could come back and you'd have dramatic reductions in costs and you could have access to space at a rate that would allow for discovery, science, all sorts of things that would allow us, to prosper, as you say, and lead the world. Well, that was one of in the first year of the Obama administration, that project was killed. We now access space by the Russians. I don't think that's a smart idea. This is the same country that is running circles around us in all parts of the world, that views the United States as a menace, not as an ally. And anytime they would want, it may not be in their commercial interest to do so now, anytime they wanted to, they could just shut down our ability to access the space station. So clearly we need to have an independent means by which to access space. And I would take it beyond that. I mean, the scientific discoveries that come from connecting with space are incredible. And I'm biased, I admit it, I'm from Florida, it's a great deal. But I think we need to be more aspirational again. I mean, I remember, this will sound kind of odd, but 4 years ago in one of the debates, Speaker Gingrich talked about colonizing the moon. And it was one of those big raucous crowds, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 Republicans. Those crowds get, you know, rowdy. Let's just leave it at that. And people started laughing. In the other debate, people running for president kind of laughed at him as well. And I'm thinking, really? I think it's pretty cool. I mean, what's wrong about having big, lofty, aspirational goals? It's not in the absence of taking care of the hungry or the poor. We're a big country, we're a generous country, and the benefits of this are far more than people realize. And so I think we have to persuade people that there are benefits in the here and now, benefits on planet Earth when we discover, when we have a zeal for discovery, and then create a strategy around it. NASA should not try to be all things to all people. And then finally, the other part of this would be partner with the dreamers in the private sector. The Elon Musks and others. You know, it's not going to be perfect. You can't plan out everything. These are dangerous risk, you know, these are not risk-adverse kind of enterprises. But partner with people that can bring kind of an intensity and creativity to the process as well. So I was thinking you were going to bring up the tragedy that took place. I'll never forget that when I went as governor of the state of Florida on the tarmac for a tribute to the astronauts that died in, I think it was 2005, wasn't it? Or no, well, the
tribute, he said. Kristen McCollum?
Yeah. No, the other one, 2002.
I remember everything.
In the 2000s. It was horrible, and it's a recognition that this is a dangerous endeavor, but it's worth us, for all sorts of reasons, to be engaged in it. Yep. Okay. You remember what your question is?
I got two though. No?
I think you can go with a two-part one.
Okay. It's two parts. Okay. The first part, like, I heard you talk a lot about, like, tax reform.
Yeah.
I don't really need it. So I heard you talk a lot about, like, tax reform.
You can take it away. He can do it.
Oh, okay. So I heard you talk a lot about, like, tax reform, right? And, like, I may be incorrect, but from my understanding, the tax system works. So you have the tax brackets. It's a progressive tax rate.
Oh, yeah.
Correct?
It's progressive.
But then it ends up being regressive because the capital gains tax rate is less than all the tax rates. And mostly rich people invest in the stock market, so they have less taxable income. So due to that, the rich people end up paying less taxes, so it ends up being regressive. So the two-part question is, one, you talking a lot about rich people creating jobs, okay? So that's essentially.
I haven't brought that up today, but people that have money normally create more jobs than people that don't.
They gonna create jobs.
Excuse me?
You thinking rich people gonna create jobs, right? But that doesn't happen. Why? Because rich people invest in the stock market. One, what are you going to do to incentivize rich people to not invest in the stock market, but to actually invest in the economy and create jobs? And two, what specifically are you going to do to close tax holes for rich people? My last part of my question.
Well, you got a three-part question.
I got a three-part. It's 2.5. So then you also said poor people can make their own decisions.
Yeah, they can.
You said that poor people can make their own decisions. So I'm asking you, one, do you think a culture of poverty exists? And if you do not think a culture of poverty exists, then how come the average white family makes a lot more money than the average black family and Latino family? And if there's no cultural poverty, what do you attribute this disparity to?
So first, let's deal with the poverty first. We do have a culture of poverty. We have intergenerational poverty for the first time in America. If you're born poor, you're more likely to stay poor than any time in American history. And there are factors in that. And to assume, therefore, there's no way for people in poverty to make decisions for themselves self-validates that intergenerational poverty. And I reject that out of hand. If you want to lift people up, you need to give them the power to make choices for themselves rather than trap them in a situation of interdependency. And it has nothing to do with race. Nothing at all. It has to do with people being born poor, staying poor because we have systems on top of them that put lids on their aspirations. If you want to lift people out of poverty, there are three things that would be helpful. One, allow them to live in safe communities. People in poverty have higher crime rates. It makes it harder for the community itself to rise up. Two, you need to have stronger families. Stronger families matter. And three, you need to make sure that jobs are available. And four, and perhaps most important, you need to revolutionize education so that everybody has a chance to be successful. On taxes. We do have a progressive tax rate when you consider that the top 1% pay 45% of all taxes in the country. That's a fairly, disproportionate amount. My proposal says we're going to reduce rates for everybody, and if you make $40,000 or less, a family of four, you won't pay any federal income taxes. The middle class will get a 33% cut in their rates. So everybody would benefit from this. We would put a cap on the reason why you may have, the marginal rate may be higher than the effective rate, which is kind of what the point you were making, right? But whether it's capital gains, there's other things as well, is that people of higher income take advantage of interest deductions. They take advantage of charitable deductions. They take advantage of, not in New Hampshire or Florida, state and local tax deductions. They take advantage of all the carve-outs and special deals, all of which are probably well-intended, but the net effect is that lowers effective rate for higher income people. My plan puts a cap on that so that you can't deduct all that you could have deducted before. My plan would eliminate the Warren Buffett story that he says that he has to pay less, he pays less than his administrative assistant. Because if you put a cap on those, on the deductions that you get, you would have the higher rate. And then on corporate rates, which is where a lot of jobs would be created as well, I'm suggesting going from 35, the highest corporate tax rate in the industrialized world, to 20%, but allow for full deduction of all capital investing. If you want to create jobs, allow for investing in our own country, eliminate worldwide taxation, and eliminate interest deduction so that people that are investing are the ones in the jobs that you're talking about are investing in the real economy. They're not investing in the financial markets. My plan also calls for the elimination of the special deduction that private equity firms get, or people in business, the so-called carried interest, where they get capital gains rate for their business. They should pay ordinary income like everybody else. So I think the proposal that I've laid out identifies some of the good points that you bring out, and I'm glad you did bring them out. Thank you. I got to go. One more? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I just got a question on women in combat.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Women in combat.
I spent a year in Vietnam in an outpost to 6 other Americans, and being there for a year, I don't think it's really a good idea, at least in the two major combat the Marines and the Army. Possibly the Navy and the Air Force, that's different. When you're flying planes or helicopters, it's a lot different than being on the ground and very up close and personal.
Exactly. So how I would go about any of these social issues, if you will, these are significant issues in the Defense Department and in the military, is I would not impose a political ideology on the military or a social, belief. You have to rely on the commanders in the field. This has to be a process where you respect. The commander-in-chief has to create the strategy, has to create the checks and balances. That's how our system works. But you can't micromanage the military. You have to make sure that every focus is on what is the optimum morale for our troops to allow them to be the safest and the most powerful military force, so that the perception and the reality of our projection of force actually makes it less likely that we do it. That should be the priority for the commander-in-chief. And so I would listen to the folks that would be making this decision, not telling them come up with the result I want, because I get a feeling sometimes that's kind of where we are. I would actually listen first before making that judgment. And you bring up a good point. There are conditions that make it hard for me to imagine, but if someone could convince me that they believe it was in the best interest for the optimum morale for our fighting forces, then I certainly would consider it. But I just think right now there's too much centralization and politicization of just about everything in Washington. We need to trust people to make these informed decisions based on their experience, which would be far more than I would have as it relates to the military. I would trust them to make that decision. We got one more, don't we? Yes, sir.
I'm Dwight Haynes, and today is the birthday of General Dwight Eisenhower.
He was a good man. Who would have known that?
1950, I was privileged to be at the Boy Scout Jamboree at Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. And later, he had some pretty strong words.
He's fine. He can have.
Thank you. He had some pretty strong, this president, Dwight Eisenhower, later had some pretty strong words to say about the growing military-industrial complex. So I'm wondering, it seems that some of the Republican candidates just want to keep growing the defense budget. That's first and foremost. We'll do whatever it takes, even if other things have to be sacrificed, because that's most important, I hear. I'm wondering, would you be willing to set some limits? And will you make sure that corporations that sell weapon systems don't influence our politicians?
Absolutely. So that's a very good point. And I thought I brought up this point to a certain extent in that every aspect of spending needs to be challenged in Washington, D.C. Every aspect. When you have the F-35, this incredible, apparently, this will be the most most powerful plane, in the sky. Better than the Russians, better than the Chinese, but its cost, the costs are exponentially more than whatever anybody ever imagined, and it's taken exponentially more time than what anybody imagined. And one of the things that's going on in Washington, D.C. now, Senator McCain's committee and the House as well, is looking at procurement reform, which I think is essential. Instead of having these big, huge, complex weapon systems, whatever they are, that require maybe 2 or 3 contractors, the only people that can get it are these big aggregators, if you will. What we ought to do is have a more strategic approach to this and then build on it. And there's lots of reasons for this. One is cost. One is speed, to getting the equipment out into the field as fast as possible. It makes you're much more agile if you start small and build on it. And as important, think how fast technology is evolving. So we're building these big, sophisticated weapon systems. The F-35 is the biggest, most expensive one, I think. And they take way too long. It does not allow for competition. And the costs seem to be there's always cost overruns. And then the technology has to be refreshed anyway. Better to do this in increments and allow the technology to grow as we innovate and new technologies emerge. There's all sorts of, just across the spectrum of life. You see technological advances certainly in information technology, but also GPS technology, all the things that require a weapon system to be effective. There's just dramatic changes. The weight of certain metals, the storage of energy, of batteries, there's all sorts of things that if we did it the right way, and this is what's being proposed, and I totally support this, it also get many more contractors onto the playing field and create a more competitive environment, more competitive process, so that the big guys don't dominate. Thank you all very much. I'd love to shake hands with as many people as I can.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.